after we got married and my husband bought this house, I thought, oh, it's right beside the train tracks. And so we're within feet, probably not legal anymore, within feet of the 50-foot measurement that they have from the center that belonged to the railway.
Oh, I see.
And there was a big gully between us and the rail tracks. And at that time, it was running 2 or 3 times a week. And it was still running in 1979 when we had Pamela, our first baby. And of course, I could hear it coming, and I'd dash into the bedroom to pick her up because I knew it would go every afternoon when she'd go for her sleep, and she'd wake up screaming because of the horn, like they'd be tooting all the way from out of town at every stop, and you could hear it from quite a distance. And when it got here, it would have to blow its horn at both here at Albert Street and over at Garifraxa. And of course, Garifraxa being a main highway, it had to really give a blast. But so I always anticipated that. And then gradually it just stopped coming, which was really sort of sad. And then they were prepared to tear the whole thing down, and they were ripping up the rail lines everywhere. And I thought that was very, very sad.
I recall both stations in Durham where they were, and the one in Barney and one in Holstein. My grandmother lived just north of Holstein. The CNR line went through her place, and I used to get a ticket in Durham and ride the train down to her place. They'd stop right in her lane on the back behind the buildings, and I'd get off the train and walk up the lane to her house. Probably it only cost pennies, I have no idea. But then the freight trains, when they're hauling gravel out of Durham, they would, when they're at their busiest, I would say there would be 2 train carload on the CNR and 2 on the CPR every day. That would be the really early 50s when they were doing the subways in Durham, or in Toronto.
Would that have been steam trains or diesel?
Oh, that'd be steam. I think by the time the diesels started, the subways were on the way more. Just to the east of the arena there where the rail line is, that they had a water tank there, and that's where the CNR train used to fill up with water. You know, there was always, I used to walk over to play hockey when I was young and I'd see the ice pouring off the side of the tank. Durham Furniture was right at the end of the line, and just south of that and the next block where they parked the cars there, that's where the station and the freight shed, and they had a coal shed there too. I would say more of the grain cars had come in on the CPR into Durham. They had a siding off to the Middle Dam Mill there. I recall one time that on the CP line right at the foot of the Durham Hill, we're across there, and there was a heavy rain and the train was crossing. There was actually a taxi coming down the hill, and maybe the brakes weren't good, or the pavement was real slippery, and the driver he opened the door and rolled out of the car, and the train, the car hit the train, but the guy was okay. He wouldn't be going maybe 20 or 25 miles an hour, and it just slowed down. They got so that they would have a special train go to Durham or something, maybe one a week or one every few weeks, and then it didn't just stop real quick. My dad bought Western cattle, and they come by train. There was a cattle pens over beside the CPR freight sheds there, and you'd unload the cattle in there, and we weren't far out of town, so you just chase the cattle up to the main street, past the police station, down the main street. All the shop owners would know you were coming, and they'd stand out there and lean on the broom and say, "Oh, those are a nice bunch of cattle." And
Warren Noble and I.
It was a second cousin.
Yeah, he's a second cousin, but he lived down past the Hutton Hill School. And anyway, he came home with me. My mother and dad were away, and he came home with me, and we were about, I guess, 12 and in that neighborhood. So the train was coming up the track, and we lived right across from on the old highway there, where Bruno Myers lives there now, out there. Anyway, Warren said, let's put our ears down to the track. And so he got on one side of the track and had his head ear down to the rail, and the train was getting pretty close. And anyway, I said, or one of us said, I guess we better get the heck out of here. So we run up our lane out behind the barn, and the train stopped. He stopped there, the engineer, and they come. We were peeking around the corner, and he came up to looked around the house, and there was nobody. Mom and Dad were away, and but anyway, away they went. And so the next day, John Gibson, he was looked after the track, you know.
Station master? Station master?
Oh, I forget there's a name for it. But anyway, they sent him out to talk to Mom and Dad. And John told Dad, he said, that happens again, those boys are going to be in deep trouble. So.
Well, I can remember going with my dad. We had sheep, and when they had them, took the wool off them, they put it in a great big bag and shipped it out in the train. And then my mother had hatching eggs, and they sent them out on the train in 30 dozen crates to Kitchener. Big 4 hatchery in Kitchener. But the eggs went out on the train every, I don't know, at least once a week. But when I worked for the Massey dealer in Durham, he had a farm just out of town here ways. And he got cattle in on the train. 2 carloads at a time. And there was one, they left the 2 cars sitting there, and we were to unload them and then trucked them out to the farm. And we unloaded, they left it next to the chute for the one car to unload, so we had to move it by hand, the 2 cars to the next. So the one guy gets up and top to work the brake, and I had the big pinch bar. You had a special bar, and you could pinch the wheel on the track and start it rolling, because it was slightly downhill. Well, it wasn't too hard to get it moving. It was the problem to get it stopped, because when it came to the door, the guy who was up on top, he was cranking at the brake and it wouldn't stop, and it went on by. So we didn't know what we were going to do. And we had somebody had traded in a Farmall M, which was a pretty big tractor. And he says, well, go over and get the M and bring it over and see if we can pull the train back, the 2 cars back. One was loaded and one was empty. But anyways, I went over to get the M, and just by the time I got back, the train had come back from Walkerton. And the guy says, oh, I know that brake don't work very well on there. He said, I'll move it back for you. So we never did get to find out whether the M would pull the car or not. Like, we got tractors and swathers and all that in on the train at the CP and the CN. CP was a lot better because they had a good siding, but CN didn't have a decent dock to unload stuff with. But one fall in September, there was a load of tractors come in just before Durham Fair, and they to the CN across from the arena. And the boss says, we'll just leave them there for the weekend. He says, that'll be just as good advertising there as any place. I got Dickson in the train one time from the hatchery. Well, they had a delivery service in Durham. From the Durham Motors ran a truck. They had a guy that picked up the freight or packages and delivered it around town. Jim Crutchley drove that for, I can remember.
We lived across the street on George Street in Durham, which was immediately across from the railway yard, and the train station was just down the street too from us. That was too far away. So our early years was playing on the railway tracks, I suppose. The little jigger was there that we could go jump on, but we never were allowed to drive it. There's a little the working crew would have their jigger parked there, and that's where I'm sure that's where David Lawrence, if you've talked about him, would start every morning from that place in Durham, and go down the track and repair whatever had to be done. My mom always said that Mal Goldsmith saved my life because I escaped and crawled over and walked over, maybe it wouldn't be 2 or 3, walked over to the railway tracks and sat down, and the train was coming apparently. I was on the tracks. And Mal saw me, and he came along and picked me up and brought me home. So I had no idea that I was in danger, I guess, at that age. Yeah, that's a story. Yeah. One of our favorite things was to go down. All those rail cars were sitting on the track quite often, and we'd like to pull the air brakes, and listen to them hiss. Oh, I remember one year there was a Halloween. Brian Nixon decided to set one of the railway cars on fire, and he spent some time in jail for doing that. And so Durham at that time was fairly wild for Halloween. And the other thing that used to happen at Halloween, the railway crossing at the foot of the hill, you could get a piece of steel and lay it across the tracks, and that would set the signal off. So that happened at Halloween always. Yeah. Some of the homes I sold in Durham were former homes that were on the railway track. So they were right on the proposed route. They just lifted them up and moved them down the streets. I can think of 4 or 5 right now that were moved for that train to come through. Bill Moore was one. His house was in the south end of Conda Street, but they moved it quite a distance from the tracks. That was one. Eric Cluley had a house that was on the railway track. There's one right at the foot of the hill where Joe Kennedy lives right now. It's just lifted north of the tracks. Durham Furniture, they had a spur going south, and that was put there just for them, I suppose, to move the furniture. The spur here, the east-west spur, ended in Walkerton and connected up with the line over at Flesherton, called Saugeen Junction. So that was a big turnaround point. And I'm sure that's what the section that Dave Lawrence looked after. I was telling you about him hiring my brother-in-law to blow snow in the wintertime. The Durham High School was just east of the present art gallery. You remember, and there's all new homes there now. The mill there would keep the parking lot plowed out, and they piled a huge pile of snow in front of the tracks. They couldn't see the train coming. My dad had a 1967 Plymouth Fury, and I was coming from the school with some of my friends and hit the train. And what I really remember about, nobody got hurt. One guy lost a tooth. I think that was the worst, maybe a bit of a concussion. So we were all lucky. We met the train. I don't know whether it's kind of an angle. We kind of almost faced the train when we hit it, and it picked us up and just turned us around. Whoa. And it had vertical headlights with a X in the middle of the grill, and it hit that right in the middle of that X, and the headlights were looking at each other. I still remember that. So that was fun. So anyway, well, it wasn't fun, but anyway, nobody was really hurt. That was the fortunate thing.
I just remember when we came down from the west, it was quite a trip. His mother was about 4 or 5 children. In 1935, and before that, maybe it was what they call the dirty 30s out there, and the grasshoppers were so bad, and the gophers, and there's just no crop. The crops were not, we couldn't exist. My mother's parents were in Normanby, But anyway, they said, Grace, you better just come on home. And Dad brought cattle and equipment down on the train. And Mother brought us children, and there was no dining room then, made lunch, first all come down on the train. My dad had come ahead of time and bought a real nice home out just in the first mile and a quarter past Wilder's Lake. And back then we were quite proud. It had hydro and a bathroom. Every day after, I called it lunch, but it was dinner years ago. I'd have my children just gone to bed and the train would come, and at the crossing it would blow and it wakes the children up from their sleep, you know. It was right at our place, yes. In 1947, everything was blocked. It was a bad storm, and the train couldn't get through for a long time until they had a lot of people shoveling a road through for them. You could go to the train tracks, as we said, and climb up the bank of snow and touch the hydro wires.
I remember talking to Floyd Lawrence. We talked about that because Floyd died. He used to be the mayor of Durham, and I had an estate that he was the executor on, and we sat and chatted about it. And he said, I used to get a ride. I'd take a ride. Sometimes I go to Holstein, sometimes I go to Mount Forest. I go on the train with the engineer. It was a train went from Durham to Palmerston, through Mount Forest and Harriston, and but it was always bringing gravel out of the south end of Durham, and that's why those pits are emptied there, because of the amount of gravel that came out. And all that gravel was going apparently. It had two destinations. One was to Toronto for the subway they were building, and the other was to it would go further to the St. Lawrence Seaway, and when they were building that through Cornwall in that area. Archie and his sister Mary and his younger sister Mary, who just died a couple of weeks ago, he and his two sisters walked every day to school, which was just south of Eckert's. I think it's Glen Oak 3, I think they called it. That's number 3. And that's where they went to school every day. So they walked to school every day, but going back, the engineer, he drove every day over to Saugeen Junction, which is Poten Station, railway term is Saugeen Junction, picked up the engine. Cars were left for him to take supplies into Durham, to Hanover, and to Walkerton. They'd load up and bring it back to Saugeen Junction at the end of the day. They get there, and then the train it was CP, and the train would, from Owen Sound going down through Dundalk and Kitchen, towards Orangeville, but not going that direction, would pick up the cars and take all the furniture to Eaton's and Simpson's downtown Toronto, wherever it went. Durham Furniture made all kinds of furniture for Eaton's, I know. The engineer always came to that side road down at Eckert's there and stopped at 3:30 in the afternoon, because Archie and Dolores and Mary would always be waiting there, and he'd take them in the train, and it would go diagonally across right from that school, just north of the school, go diagonally across and come out on the second concession, right at the intersection at where the second side road down, or the second concession down, met with the second side road. So they diagonally across there, and he let them out. It's only had a half a mile to walk home.
Mother said, we're getting out of Arnie, because there was a sand pit behind, a creek behind, a railroad track behind, Highway 6 in front, and a swimming pool in front, and a creek in front. And she said, we're leaving Varney. We were there until 59, after my brother got killed in 57. We went to school. He was 13, I was 11, I guess. We came home from school at noon hour. They let us off early. The Fleischman boys were there, 2 brothers, Freddie and Leonard. We went back over the railroad tracks. We used to puddle around in the little creek and play around with water and sticks and stuff. So when we came up, I came up first with, who did I come up with? I guess it was Leonard. We were in the barn, or a little small barn. It was open on one side there. Dad was at home that day. I think it was a Wednesday or Tuesday. Dad was recuperating from a hernia operation. And he was cutting some wood in the backyard with a buzzsaw. And Earl came up with Fred. But Fred was ahead of Earl. And when he heard the train coming, he was already over the tracks. He turned around and seen Earl just basically walk right in front of it. Because he was always daydreaming, looking at his feet. And the engineer blew the horn, but it was a windy day. The leaves were rattling, and he was dreaming, and he got hit there. He got through down about, I don't know, quite a piece with the train. Oh, my ribs are killing me. Yeah. And he was laying in the ditch just like he was sleeping. His one foot was all mangled, and the side of his head here was caved right in. And I seen it. I walked right up to him. He was laying there like he was sleeping on the edge of the bank, you know, going up to the tracks. And by the time the ambulance got there, they said he was dead. They loaded him in the ambulance. That was in 1957. First day back to school. And ever after that, every time I looked down at my boots to see if they were laced, I better pick my head up real quick, or the old man would slap me in the head for looking at my boots. Didn't want nobody else doting or sleeping. We had an engineer that actually used to throw candy off out of his little engine door there. I don't know who he was. He likely knew my dad and knew all of us kids. Were like a cluster there. We used to get little bags of candy sometimes. Be hard candy. Threw right out of the engine. Yeah. And Dave's my buddy. He's a really good friend. And my brothers worked for him on the railroad. And guess what? They liked him. And not too many bosses were liked by my brothers.
Coke and building supplies, my dad called the business. We had the stockyards along the tracks there, as well as my grandfather built coal sheds along the tracks where you could run the coal off the train cars into the building, and then out the front into the trucks or whatever to deliver it around. In 1947, he said he had a car of coal a week, 52 cars of coal that year delivered to Durham and an area. You were going to deliver to such and such a customer, and the scales were run by the town in where the police station is now. That was the town clerk's office until it moved over to the main street. And one time back when a guy named Norm Bell, my dad went out west they bought horses, brought him into the stockyard. Anyway, they came in there and they had quite a show of the horses getting off the train over there. And my dad got me to go on the train in the caboose from here to Walker and back. That was a big adventure back then. When I was very small. I know my dad used to talk about the hockey team going out of the CN down to play in Palmerston. Went out and they had a special train for them or not a special train, but they would go down by train one day and come back the next after playing hockey in Palmerston or Palmerston, whatever you want to call it.